You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 1st of July 2013. Border Agency detain 13 illegal workers in London. UK mosques giving anti-grooming sermons in response to sex abuse cases. GPs preparing to resist health tourism crackdown. TB-infected carcasses being sold for food. Celebrations as Croatia becomes the 28th country to join the EU. New EU plan will make every bank account in Europe vulnerable to Cyprus-style wealth confiscation. Germany faced with loudspeaker jihad. World's richest bank is Chinese. Thought for the day, news which raises the temperature. And finally, are you one of these twits? UK news. Border Agency detained 13 illegal workers in London. Border Agency officials raided 2 London sites in search for illegal immigrant workers. 4 workers were detained at the £400 million renovation of the world-famous London Bridge station, which is being transformed into a giant shopping mall. The workers were employed by Lancashire firm Bower Cross. All were from India and in their mid-20s and were arrested for employment offences in overstaying their visas and remaining in Britain illegally. 9 Pakistani and Indian workers were arrested in a raid on a West London dairy in Acton. The companies face a £10,000 fine for each illegal employee. World at 8 says, make it £100,000 for each illegal employee and these businesses may get the message. These fines should be given to the Border Agency for further enforcement officers. Mosques giving anti-grooming sermons in response to sex abuse cases. Some 500 UK mosques planned sermons condemning the sexual abuse of children following the sentencing of 7 men of South Asian origin convicted of a series of crimes against underage girls. The effort, organised by the group Together Against Grooming, TAG, means that the message was being delivered at Friday prayers at participating mosques. The anti-grooming group wants imams to stress that the Quran rules out all forms of sexual abuse and that Muslims have the responsibility to protect children and other vulnerable people. TAG spokesman Ansar Ali says it's unprecedented for Islamic leaders throughout Britain to band together to deliver a collective message on the same day. A number of prominent Muslim groups in Britain have endorsed the new group. But TAG's national sermon on child grooming is shunned as a stunt by many Muslims in Oxford. Several Oxford mosques did not take part in Friday's simultaneous anti-grooming sermons held across the country. But Oxford Islamic leaders yesterday said it was wrong to link child sex grooming cases to their religion as the abusers were not practising Muslims. The leaders went on to label the TAG sermons as a publicity stunt that fed into the far-right agenda that grooming gangs stem from the Islamic culture. One leader said most of the guys who did this in Oxford were not going to the mosque. I have always felt it is not a race or religious issue. As far as grooming issue is concerned, I think it is now history. World at 8 says, I saw the film rolled out on TV. Strange that certain well-placed mosques allowed cameras in for this, and of course it was all rehearsed. The attendees looked as bored as the imams did, and the Oxford pests say it all for the religion of Islam. That is, keep doing it, but don't get found out. If anyone thinks this so-called message is genuine, they're thicker than I would give them credit for. GPs preparing to resist health tourism crackdown. GPs will be forced to police access to healthcare and impose charges on foreign nationals under plans to be announced this week by the government. Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt has ordered an audit of the costs of the NHS of use by so-called health tourists. The DH has confirmed he will announce details of the crackdown on Wednesday, which will include a registration and tracking system. GP practices will be forced to identify patients who do not qualify for free healthcare. The NHS estimated in 2011-2012 that it spent £33 million treating foreign nationals, £21 million of which was recovered, with £12 million written off. Ministers announced plans to clamp down on health tourism in the Queen's speech in May. GP leaders said then that doctors must not be made responsible for policing access to the NHS. World at 8 states, if the GP won't ensure a patient is entitled to free healthcare, just who in the bloody hell do these privileged bastards think should do the job? TB-infected carcasses being sold for food. Meat from cattle slaughtered after testing positive for bovine tuberculosis (BTB) is being sold for human consumption and earning millions of pounds for the government, it has emerged. Officials have insisted that the meat is fit to eat and have labelled claims to the contrary as irresponsible scaremongering. Last year, DEFRA, the Food and Farming Ministry, sold raw meat from around 28,000 diseased animals, raking in almost 10 million of the 34 million it paid out to farmers in compensation for lost income. Most supermarkets and burger chains refuse to buy the meat, including Tesco, which doesn't take it due, it says, to public health concerns surrounding the issue of BTB and its risk to consumers. However, it is being sold to some caterers and food processors and finding its way into schools, hospitals and the military, or being processed into products such as pies and pasties. Besides Tesco, other major companies that reject the meat include Sainsbury's, Burger King and McDonald's. World at 8 comments. So it's okay to eat horse but not beef. I don't believe that TB can be passed on from eating this meat. It stands to reason it's taking the heat out of the spread of tuberculosis through immigrants, which is a much more dangerous and unspoken method of contracting it, through schools especially. European news. Celebrations as Croatia becomes the 28th country to join the EU. Tens of thousands of Croatians have packed the capital of Zagreb to celebrate the country's entry into the European Union. It's the 28th country to join the bloc. For Croatia, it's a remarkable milestone, given the country was in the middle of a brutal war of independence just 2 decades ago. But the celebrations have been overshadowed by Croatia's economic woes, leading to some to question joining a bloc struggling to deal with its own major financial troubles. World at 8 says, oh joy, yet another poverty-stricken mainly Islamic country for us to feed and accept into the UK. Can't wait for the sodding Romas next year. Talk about the EU getting other countries to do its dirty work in the UK and Europe. New EU plan will make every bank account in Europe vulnerable to Cyprus-style wealth confiscation. Michael Snyder of the Economic Collapse writes, did you actually believe that they were not going to use the precedent that they set in Cyprus? On Thursday, EU finance ministers agreed to a shocking new plan that will make every bank account in Europe vulnerable to Cyprus-style bail-ins. In other words, the wealth confiscation that we have just witnessed in Cyprus will now be used as a template for future bank failures all over Europe. That means that if you have a bank account in Europe, you could wake up some morning and every penny in that account over €100,000 could be gone. That's exactly what happened in Cyprus, and now EU officials plan to do the same thing all over Europe. For quite a while, EU officials insisted that Cyprus was a special case, but now we see it was a lie. International outrage over what happened in Cyprus has died down, and now they're pushing forward with what they probably had planned all along. But why have they chosen this specific moment to implement such a plan? Are they anticipating that we will see a wave of bank failures soon? Do they know something that they aren't telling us? Amazingly, this announcement received very little notice in the international media. The fact that bank account confiscation will now be a permanent part of the plan to bail out troubled banks in Europe should have made headline news all over the globe. World at 8 says, my cup runneth over here, mateys. Am I missing something rather important? Haven't the EU twats learnt that they aren't very good with handling their own money, let alone someone else's? This means although they appear good to give a guaranteed amount at all, it means if someone has €500,000 in his account and the bank goes phut, he will only get around €100,000, which is around £70,000. Germany faced with loudspeaker jihad. A Turkish mosque in the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia has begun sounding public calls to prayer from an outside loudspeaker system mounted on the roof of the edifice. The mosque is one of a growing number of Islamic institutions in Germany and other parts of Western Europe, publicly calling the Muslim faithful to prayer 5 times a day, 7 days a week, with cries of Allahu Akbar, God is great. Observers believe a precedent has now been established and that many of the other 3,000 mosques in Germany will soon begin jumping on the muezzin loudspeaker bandwagon. The sonorous prayer calls, known as adhan in Arabic, can be heard from great distances when amplified through electric loudspeakers. Some German towns and cities are actually beginning to evoke the sounds and images of the Islamic Middle East. The latest muezzin event involves the Fatih Kami Mosque in Wipperfurt, a factory town situated 25 miles northeast of Cologne, which on June the 21st began publicly calling the Muslim faithful to prayer during a formal muezzin induction ceremony, attended by local and foreign dignitaries including the Turkish consul Mustafa Kemal Basa. The Fateh Kami Mosque, run by the Turkish Islamic Union for Islamic Affairs, a branch of the Turkish government that controls over 900 mosques in Germany, received municipal approval for a muezzin publicly to call Muslims to the mosque for prayer 5 times a day after Mayor Michael van Rakowski said he wanted to show the world that Wipperfurt takes pride in being an intercultural and interreligious community. World at 8. Simple. Reinstate the local church bells to ring at the same time every day, 5 times a day. World news. Syrian insurgents behead Christians for helping military as CIA ships in arms. A priest and another Christian were beheaded before a cheering crowd by Syrian insurgents who say they aided and abetted the enemy, President Bashar al-Assad's military, foreign media have reported. An undated video that made the internet rounds on Wednesday showed 2 unnamed men with tied hands surrounded by a cheering crowd of dozens just moments before their heads were cut off with a small knife, Syria reports said. The attackers in the video then lifted the heads for show and placed them back on the bodies. The incident took place in the countryside of Idlib, the media report said. Syria report said that the foreign militants have increased attacks on civilians in recent weeks and that many of these insurgents are supported by the West and by Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey. Just recently a Catholic priest was recently executed by radicals and last month an entire Christian village in Homs was burnt to the ground. Moreover, 2 Christian bishops kidnapped in Aleppo at the beginning of the year are still missing. The reported beheading of the 2 Christians comes about the same time America has started sending arms to rebel fighters, the Wall Street Journal revealed this week. The Journal reported the Central Intelligence Agency just began transporting weapons to Jordan for eventual transfer to Syrian fighters. The weapons transfer is aimed at helping Free Syrian Forces oust Mr Assad. It's scheduled to coincide with arms shipments from other European and Arab allies for a planned and coordinated rebel attack set for August, the Journal reported. The CIA weapons transfer will take about 3 weeks and involves light arms and possibly anti-tank missiles. The world's richest bank is Chinese. ICP, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, occupied pride of place, jumping from 3rd place to the top spot, changing places with the Bank of America. JP Morgan remained in 2nd place. HSBC in 4th place was the only British bank in the top 10, largely because of the significant contribution from its Asian business. By the way, HSBC stands for Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, a really good Old English name. Overall, even French banks were more profitable than their toiling British counterparts last year. The dismal performance of the British banks is illustrated in the latest edition of the Banker's Top 1000 World Banks, published today. It shows their profits slumped 41%, while French banks contained their fall to 30%. HSBC and Barclays reported lower profits, but the 2 banks rescued by the taxpayer, RBS and Lloyds, remained heavily in the red. Thought for the day. News which raises the temperature. These are the news items which raise my temperature, and not in a good way. Many are the result of misinformation and deliberately put in front of the public to allay their very real concerns or just to tip them in the direction of the common purpose New World Order concept. The first thing to catch my eye was the terrible story of little Raja the elephant in Sumatra, and the fact he died starving and alone, chained to a tree in a grot hole inhabited by 3rd world primitives. Apparently the elephants got to Sumatra, which is an island, when the land was a single landmass. Well, that's the popular feeling, and obviously dates back to prehistoric times. I was always under the impression that they'd been imported for work at some early stage in the last couple of centuries, but this is obviously not a politically correct thought. Anyway, the problem is that the Western world, and indeed the rest of Asia, want palm oil. It's used extensively by the supermarkets in their own brands. Nestle, Haribo, Kellogg's and Mars and more all use palm oil. There are some responsibly sourced oils, but it is a silent assassin. Consumer money assured and consciences waived, as the verdant rainforest of Acre in North Sumatra is one of the largest sources left in Southeast Asia, and it is the only place in the world where tigers, elephants, orangutans and rhinos all live together Unfortunately, that also includes humans. Whilst greedy for the money that devastating the forest will bring, they also don't understand that for elephants these forests were their homes, and deprived of the only home they've known for hundreds of years, the poor starving creatures go into the villages that have sprung up and wreak havoc. They are not an educated people or a people that have a fondness for wildlife, so they don't understand that chaining a baby elephant to a tree and leaving it to die isn't exactly solving the problem. The group called Elephant Family tried to negotiate with the villagers for Rajah, but no go, and indeed all EF needed was a pair of chain cutters and a large van, and should have taken the little soul away to a sanctuary. How can you negotiate with a primitive? Try chaining a Sumatran brat to a tree and leave it there, and the sodding UN would have moved in pretty quickly. They've got another baby calf in now which is being held to ransom, when in fact they should hold the large corporations to ransom and withhold the stocks of palm oil, and then they would see more money and less death. Palm oil is used in biscuits, margarine, ice cream, soap, shampoo, and the list is endless, and is yet another example of I deserve it culture of the poor and lazy members of the EU, NATO and United Nations. The whines of Winnie Mandela and the fact she still loves him ruined my Sunday, plus the awful picture of her in tribal dress, which apparently Nelson had in his cell during his well-deserved stay in prison. Well, let's hope it still did it for him when good old Winnie was abducting and sexually abusing little boys from the townships and then getting them killed if they told. This same cell has proved a point for a president looking good and thoughtful in one picture of Obama in his native country standing in Nelson's old cell. It might be a good idea to shut the door and lose the key here, I feel, especially in the light of the news that the Assad busters are being trained in Jordan by the American Special Forces, and this has put the wind up the Jordanians for fear of the Syrian sleeper cells being awakened, which is daft because they are already awake, just waiting for the call to jihad. The picture and large page devoted to sodding Stephen Lawrence and the endless tripe given public voice by his parents are a nodding homage to our multicultural landmass, and I'm fully expecting to see Stephen Lawrence elevated to sainthood this time next year. Why? He has fulfilled all the criteria needed by the Roman Catholic Church for sainthood, and that is 3 miracles. And they are: bringing together all the liberal lovies and media in a universal condemnation of a fairly low-key crime, uniting the establishment, media and police to form a firm bias towards black on white crimes, giving a voice to the members of the 3 political parties, which has resulted in a change of law which all the crimes perpetrated against white majorities have failed to do. So does that sound good? St. Stephen, protector of black drug runners and black gangs. It sounds okay to me. The news that Kuwaitis have bought £16 billion of the British assets is rich, as I didn't know we had that many assets left anyway. Apparently on the 60th anniversary of the Kuwait Investment Office being installed in London, Badr Mohammed Al Sayed, managing director, said the KIO now manages more than $120 billion globally compared to only $27 billion 10 years ago. They've invested heavily in BP, Vodafone and the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. Oh joy! This merged with the news that John Longworth, Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce, said that only 1% of BBC members, that is British Chamber of Commerce members, not the BBC, feel that overseas aid is a priority for spending, and how right they are. Mr Longworth says the budget should be cut by at least £3.4 billion, despite overseas aid being ring-fenced from the government cuts in last week's spending review. Note World Data Friday. What didn't hit the headlines was the rise in foreign aid announced by the Chancellor of £800 million 2015-16, bringing the total amount to £11.7 billion. Put this with the increase in foreign parasites to the UK primarily for our NHS services and we have a real problem. Not only do foreign powers practically own all our public services, water, gas and electricity, but their inroads into our actual domestic workings are enormous and far-reaching. The stories of foreigners not even bothering to emigrate here but just do flying visits has been a problem for some considerable time, but much underreported and certainly never acted upon by the Border Agency or any other government body. The Nigerians seem, as usual, to be in the forefront of things being got for free. For many years during the 80s, Nigerian students came over, shagged each other and left the results in council care, especially around Wiltshire. The local authorities at most of these places didn't report it and simply took these babies in and put them with local people, of course at a cost to you, the taxpayer. Nobody does anything for free. So now we have more of them coming in, having quintuplets of all things. I ask you, quins! Obviously no trouble conceiving litters and no help needed from the fertility people, and the cost to you? £200,000 in surgeon and care fees. I hope a note was made, and if this lady returns they'll just pop her on the plane back. We have the Africans with HIV medicines and another Nigerian with leukemia who cost you £74,000. A Seychelles man had neck surgery which cost you £54,000 and an American, probably a black one, cost you £60,000 for HIV treatment. To cap it all, the Surrey and Sussex Healthcare NHS Trust have spent £217,000 on intensive care for one patient last year. Yet the £70 million figure in unpaid bills only represents a small fraction of the widespread abuse. Even the Department of Health admitted that the total was just the tip of the iceberg. All this whilst our own cancer patients are in fear of losing their medicines if the Cancer Drugs Fund is wound up in 2014. The £2 million fund, which began April 2011, has led so far to 30,000 patients in England being given drugs banned on the NHS by NICE, that money-making pharma-backed governing body. So our own might lose their life-saving drugs whilst we're still funding foreigners who come over just to scam the NHS, which is hardly functioning for our own people nowadays. When and where does our generosity stop? So we have baby elephants, St Stephen, Obama, Mandela, Kuwaitis, Foreign Aid and a smattering of published foreign parasites, all of which will never receive the justice they really deserve. And I know that apart from poor little Raja, what I would like to do to the lot of them. The last item is fracking, and in case you think I'm swearing at you, I'm not. Fracking is the word for blowing up various parts of a country to get people an affordable, clean, homegrown energy supply which would free us from unstable regimes. Fracking to that one, I say. There's an anti-green movement now from our government which is backing fracking. In the words of David Davis MP, there's enough shale gas to power Britain, and all our ethnics of course, for a century, and some experts, very well paid no doubt, think this is just the beginning. Now, although not an expert in the field of peak oil or a geologist, what happened to coal fusion? It's well known even within global governmental circles that if any form of cheap, free, sustainable energy for the common people had been or was in the course of being invented, tested and used, we would be the last to know about it. The world establishment doesn't want free, clean energy. It doesn't pay. And anything that doesn't pay doesn't even see the light of day. Facts are facts. Is anyone going to tell me that there hasn't been some sort of invention of a source of energy which is viable during the last years since the war, with all those very advanced and clever German scientists they took in? Hell no. Another point to remember is that the world would never upset the Arab nations with an alternative method of giving the West the power it needs. If we had, OPEC would be bust and the entire Muslim world would be back to camels and sand within a few years. The good side of it is that they would not have the money gained from oil to buy out most of Europe and America, which seems to be the way the world stage is going. Reliance on the people who hate us and everything we stand for seems to be the norm. Roll on coal fusion. Fracking is dangerous to the environment despite what so-called energy experts say. They list how fracking really works, with firstly drilling rigs boring down into the gas shale at more than 7,000 feet, and after the drilling rig is removed a small box is left which is safer for birds than wind turbines. That I can understand. But the second stage is rather more dicey, when water and sand are pumped into the channels drilled into the shale, causing tiny fractures which allow long-term release of gas. Friends of the Earth say this risks earthquakes, but the experts say that in millions of fracking operations in the US, there has not been one tremor big enough to cause damage. Now, although not an expert, this doesn't make sense, As Chris Wright, Chief Director of Liberty Resources in the United States and one of its biggest investors, says that in Britain the shale beds are more than a mile thick, as opposed to the US where they're a few hundred feet. Now, to a newbie to fracking language, I would have thought if we had a larger amount of earth and rock to drill to our shale beds, which are deeper than the American ones, then our drilling would be more damaging to that area than just going down a few hundred feet as they do in the States. Am I wrong here? No, I ain't. If our shale gas is deeper, then the drilling will be greater and the risk to that area unknown. All the cases where people have quoted answers to concerns are cited in the States, where they've admitted circumstances are very different. Do you think our government will listen? No, it's buyer beware. Our governments and any governments, political bodies, quangos, committees, research groups, reports and investigations are all heavily biased in the direction of preserving the Arab world and its money for the future. They are not biased in favour of the common man of any country or creed who doesn't have the money to argue or put his case. And that is a sad fact on how low civilised society has gone down. Remember, it is the love of money above all things that is evil, not necessarily capitalism, communism, socialism, fascism, religion or humanity. It's the begetting of cold hard cash that is now the ruler of the world. And finally, are you really one of these twits? It's reported in the Telegraph and agencies that men try to impress their friends almost twice as much as women do by quoting Shakespeare and pretending to like jazz to seem more clever. A fifth of all adults admitted they try to impress others by making out they're more cultured than they really are, but this rises to 41% in London. Scotland is the least pretentious country, as only 14% of the 1,000 UK adults surveyed had faked their intelligence there, according to Ask Jeeves research. A spokesman for Ask Jeeves said, "We were surprised by just how many people think they should go to such lengths in order to impress someone else. They obviously think they'll make a better impression if they pretend to like Beethoven rather than admit they listen to Beyonce or read The Spectator rather than Loaded." Social media and the internet means it's increasingly easy to present this kind of false image about themselves. But in the end, if they're really going to be liked, then it's going to be for the person they really are rather than the person they're pretending to be. Social media also plays a large part with people sharing Facebook posts on politics or retweeting clever tweets to raise their intellectual profile. Men were the biggest offenders, with 26% of men admitting to acts of pretense compared to 14% women. Top things people have done to seem smarter. Repeated someone else's joke as your own. Oh yeah, well, we know one of those. Gone to an art gallery. Listened to classical music in front of others. Read a serious book on the beach. Retweeted a clever tweet. Talk loudly about politics in front of others. Oh, pray that's not nationalism. Read a serious magazine on public transport. Shared an intellectual article on Facebook. Quoted Shakespeare. Pretended to know about wine. Worn glasses with clear lenses. Mentioned an opera you've seen. Pretended to like jazz. This presenter says, oh dear, well you cannot believe everything people put on the computer, can you? But really, how very sad. It just shows how certain publicity feels influence in our everyday life, doesn't it? You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne and I wish you all a very good night.